Hi, and welcome to Parashat Yitro, the Parasha of the Ten Commandments. And in this episode, we're going to ask a question. Have you ever wondered what life would be like if you had a clear vision about your life mission here? Wouldn't the challenges of life and the different forks that we have to face be much more easier to overcome and to make the right decisions if we had that clarity? Well, in this week's parasha, we're going to give clarity as to the life mission of the Jewish nation. And it's fascinating what comes out of that. But before we do that, the Alshech asks another question, which is, how do we understand the timing of Hashem? In other words, when we want to manifest something in our lives, we want it immediately. And yet we find that we have to wait. Why do we have to wait? And why do we have to wait till Hashem deems it to be ready? And the Alshech asks this fundamental question with regards to Matan Torah, the receiving of the Torah. Because he says like this, when we left Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan, it took us 49 days before we were ready to receive Matan Torah, the Ten Commandments. And yet, it took another 40 days before we got the Luchot, the tablets. We don't understand this. Why didn't we just get the Luchot at the same time as we got the Ten Commandments? Moreover, we know that between receiving the Ten Commandments and receiving the tablets, we have the incidence of the golden calf, which completely messed everything up for us. So why did God wait another 40 days after giving us Matan Torah? We're going to be exploring these issues now. Receiving the Torah is equivalent to a marriage between the Jewish people and God. And the Alshech quotes two Midrashim and the Zohar to explain what situations do we have to wait between wanting to get married and actually getting married. And the first one is the quotation from Midrash Yalkut Shimoni, where he says that Rav Chia says that a captive or a convert has to wait 3 months before getting married, because we want to make sure that any children that is born from this union are the children from the new husband as opposed to any previous ones. And so that is the first situation. The second situation that the Alshech quotes is quoting the Zohar: when a Jewish woman gets married, she has to wait 7 days to purify herself from Nida. And the Jewish people are akin to Nida because the Jewish people served idols in Egypt, and that is the impurity of the idol worshipping that they attracted to them was the equivalent of the impurity of Nida. And as Nida needs 7 days, clean days of separation before a woman can connect with her husband, likewise, the Jewish nation needed 7 weeks. That's 7 times 7, the power of 7, to wait between, so to speak, coming under the chuppah. And this is further exampled by the fact that in the Omer, which is the period of time we count from Pesach to Shavuot, the Omer we are supposed to be giving at the day one barley. This is the equivalent of animal food, because we were at the beginning of the process of Yetziat. When we left Egypt, we were at the equivalent levels of the animals, and yet in Shavuot we are required to bring 2 loaves of wheat flour. And this is human food, because at that stage we have refined ourselves to the level of human. The 49 days, 50 days, which represents the purification of the Nida, and the 90 days in total, which is the 50 plus the other 14 days before getting the Torah, to represent the 3 months that we have to wait before properly getting married to a convert or a captive. And the Alshech gives a mashal. He says, imagine a situation where the king of Israel wants to marry a captive and a convert. He has to wait for 2 reasons. Firstly, to purify the woman for Nida, and secondly, to wait 3 months to make sure that any child that's born is from him. But his love of his wife to be is so great. He loves her so much that he can't wait. So what does he do? He actually gives instructions for her to remove her captive clothing, put on festive clothing, and then after 7 days of purification to go to the mikveh, and that will allow him to give her a kiss. And this kiss will nourish him and be able to give him ease of heart, of his longing of heart to be with his wife, to wait for the remainder of the 3 months before she can be his wife. And in this mashal, the Jewish people are akin to the convert or captives, because in Egypt they idol worshipped, and that attracted the force of impurity to them, the same way as Nida would. And in order to show their sincerity to convert, Hashem gave them 2 mitzvot, the Korban Pesach and the circumcision, and this demonstrated their willingness to convert and basically to become a new nation that belongs exclusively to Hashem. And Hashem, from Hashem's perspective, he wants to bring the Jewish nation close to him, to unite to him, to be sanctified, to be close to him, and he gives them the mitzvot. As a result of making the mitzvot, they create angels that produce the holiness that allows them to connect with Hashem. But there are two factors preventing the king from marrying him, as we said: the purity of Tumah and waiting the 90 days. The purity of Tumah, we said, was overcome by the two mitzvot given, the Korban Pesach, which was really a demonstration of how willing the Jewish people were to risk their lives in order to sanctify Hashem. This was the exact opposite of Chilul Hashem, of Avodah Zarah, and to separate themselves from the whole idea of idol worshipping. And the circumcision was the equivalent of us putting new garments, festive garments, to allow us to connect more speedily with the king. So let's look at the final preparations for Matan Torah. We arrived at Mount Sinai on the 1st of Sivan, Rosh Chodesh, but we waited till the 6th before receiving the Ten Commandments. And why? Because during those last 6 days, the Bnei Israel's purification was accelerated as a result of the proximity to the Mount Sinai, because at Mount Sinai we had the Shekhinah of Hashem, and that proximity accelerated the purification. But the Alshech says that we were only purified enough for the souls to be completely purified, but not the body. The body needed another 40 days to be purified. But let's have a look at what was achieved by the fact that our souls were purified. It allows our soul to come into the chuppah at the time of the Ten Commandments. And this is akin to the kiss that we were talking about before. And let's understand what a kiss is. Shir Hashirim says that a kiss of the mouth, it was like Matan Torah. In what way? The kiss unites 2 souls together. And we know that the mouth is the centerpiece of the soul, in that the mouth differentiates the human being from any other being by the fact that he is able to speak. It's a speaking soul, as we saw in Bereshit. Adam is described as nefesh haya, a speaking soul. And we're also reminded that when Aaron and Moshe and Miriam passed away, they passed away through the divine kiss. And what was that? Basically, the Hashem's divine essence comes in and connects with the soul of the tzaddik, and pulls out the soul out of its physical body and brings it to heaven. And this is also done in the form of a kiss with regards to tzaddikim. And so in Mount Sinai, when we got the Torah, each Jew, so to speak, received a divine kiss. But as we said before, only the souls were at the level to be able to have the vehicle to sustain such a close proximity to Hashem's Kedusha, and therefore, but the bodies were not, and that's why they died, and they had to be revived, and Tchiyat HaMitim, and their souls had to be reinvested into their bodies by Hashem after each of the first 2 Ten Commandments, which they heard directly from Hashem. And let's understand that the divine kiss is like a prophecy, but prophets don't die when they get prophecy. Why is that? And the Alshech explains that a prophet has refined himself, both soul and its body, enough to create that vehicle, the vessel, to allow him to receive that divine kiss, so to speak, without dying. But the Jewish people were not yet at that level. And the body had to wait another 40 days before it would be purified enough to receive the Ten Commandments in the Torah in a tablet form, in a physical form. And these 40 days are akin to the 40 days that the embryo in a mother's womb takes before the embryo is formed. It takes 40 days. Because it took 40 days for Bnei Israel to transform their bodies to a level that can receive it. So when we receive the lochot, the tablets, 40 days later, both the body and the soul together were purified enough to receive the revelation, the divine revelation of Hashem in this world. And that was when the marriage, so to speak, has been completed and is permanent. So when we come to Har Sinai and receive the Ten Commandments on the 6th of Sivan, at that stage we were given as a nation two spiritual crowns. The Alshech describes from the Midrash that 600,000 angels come down and put on each of the heads of the Jewish people two crowns with the names of Hashem in it. The first crown representing when we said Naaseh, and the second crown responding to what we said, Venishma, Naaseh Venishma. And what is fascinating is that with this crowning, that the consequence of that was that the angel of death had no more power over us. We were elevated back to the point where Adam Avinu, before his sin of eating from the tree, that's where we were elevated. But at Sinai on the 6th of Sivan, that elevation was just a temporary elevation to that location so we can receive the Ten Commandments. And that elevation would have been permanent once we achieved the 40 days to have the complete physical marriage to Hashem, and for that to be permanent. And if we had lasted that long without the golden calf, then we would have lived forever. How about that? And this is further reinforced in chapter 32, verse 16, where Hashem says he etched charut, he etched the words of Hashem onto the luchot, onto the tablets. And the Alshech says, don't read charut, read cherut, which means freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from the angel of death, which would have allowed us to live forever. And so, in conclusion, we had to wait from Yetziat Mitzrayim 50 days before we were purified enough from the soul level to receive the Ten Commandments. This was the equivalent of us, the 7 days of Nidah, the 7 weeks that we waited to allow us to connect with Hashem on a soul level via the kiss. And we had to wait a total of 90 days. That's the first 50 to Matan Torah, and then another 40 days until we got the Luchot, in order to give the time for our bodies to purify, and for the marriage to be consummated in full. And notice how the soul takes much less time than the body to recover. And we have to realize that this part of this was that the proximity to Hashem's closeness. You see, we got to Mount Sinai, we said, from the 1st and to the 6th. That was the final purification of the soul. That was 6 days of intense connection with Hashem to purify the soul. And then 40 days when the Shekhinah was still in Mount Sinai to purify the body. So the body needs nearly 10 times as much time to heal as the soul. And we see that in healing, because when we're emotionally connected with our healing and ready to heal, it takes the body that much longer to catch up with where we are mentally. And now let's look at the second mashal that the Alshech brings, and that is the mashal of the father and the son. Because the father loves the son, tremendously, and his desire is to be one and whole with his son. But sometimes when life comes in, a spiritual iron wall is created, and when that happens, the son can't hear the father until the son grows up enough to be able to tear down the wall, and then he can see the father again, and then they can be intimate together as they were before. And the mashal here is that Hashem creates Adam, he invites Adam to be close to him as one, and then the spiritual snake comes in, and the whole incidence of us eating from the tree comes in. That's the iron wall, and us growing is us being refined from the whole process of Mitzrayim and coming out ready to tear down this iron wall, which we do. And then we have this burst of love when the wall is destroyed. Remember when Lahavdil, when Berlin came down, the burst of energy that existed in the world when those two parts of the city were reunited. If we want to understand the level of passion and willingness for Hashem to reunite with us, this mashal can help us do that. And it's interesting that Zeuma, the impurity of the snake, is all about ego, it's all about individuality, and that is about separation. Whereas a purity and holiness is about removing divisions, uniting, and prophecy. And so they're complete opposites. But here we see also why we can say Dayenu at the Seder night. I never understood that, because we say, oh, if you just took us out of Egypt and we got to Mount Sinai and we didn't get the Torah, we would still say Dayenu. In what way would that be Dayenu? I mean, you've missed the whole point of the exercise. But now we can see what it means. It means that even before we got the Matan Torah, when we were at Mount Sinai, we were spiritually cleansed enough to have removed all the impurity of their zoma, of the snake, which would have taken 1,000 generations to purify us. And God, in His mercy, reduces that to 26 generations. And we, coming out of Egypt, were the 26th generations that were able to rid itself for the first time since the creation of Adam of the impurity of the snake. And what an achievement that must have felt, to be completely liberated from the pull of the snake and the pollution that creates individuality and separation. And so we can see that the Jewish people raised themselves into that level. But what about Moshe? Moshe was already at that level. For him, Matan Torah was all about him elevating to the state that Moshe himself could allow. Moshe Allah. He climbed up the mountain even before God called him to come up. That means that Moshe was able to connect and climb up to connect with Hashem without any help from the angels, and at will almost, which is an incredible achievement. And finally, let's understand what our life mission is as a nation. In chapter 19, verse 5, it says, V'ata, and now, Im shamu tishma'u bikoli, if you will listen to my voice, ushmatem et beriti, and you will keep my covenant, v'hitem li sigula, and you will become for me a treasured people, mikol ha'amim, from all the nations of the world, ki li kol haaretz, because all the world belongs to me. Ve'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So let's try to decipher that. The Alshech is going to help us. He says as follows: we were given 5 levels of elevation. We see this. The first level was the fact that we as a nation saw the angel of Mitzrayim dead on the seashores, as it were, when we left Mitzrayim. This was on the basis of the Zchut Avot, the merit of our fathers. Secondly, we were transported from Ramses to Sukkot on angel wings. This is because, as a result of what we did, the 2 mitzvot of Korban Pesach and the Brit Milah, we were elevated to to the place higher than angels, and this enabled us to be carried on the wings. The third level of elevation is when we reached Mount Sinai, and there Hashem was already there, because it says, Devarim chapter 33 verse 2, that Hashem misinai ba. Hashem came from Sinai. What do you mean came from Sinai? I thought he came to Sinai to meet us. No, he was already there before we arrived. That was the third level of elevation, because normally a king arrives once the entourage comes, but here the king was there before we arrived. The fourth level was the fact that we were at that we had that connection, that soul connection with Hashem, without any intermediaries. And the fifth is now. The invitation is now. If you now listen to my voice and you follow my commandments and the covenant, and you stay loyal to me, then you have the permanent freedom from the angel of death, and you will become a treasured nation unto me. And how do we understand this treasured nation, this preferential nation status? And the Alshech brings a beautiful mashal. He says, imagine the king at his palace. He has many people serving him. He has the regular guard that serve him day in and day out, and he has a special mission guards that go out for special tasks. They go out of the palace, they do their tasks, and they come back and they get rewarded for that. So the initial type of guards, the guards that stay always in the palace, so to speak, are the angels, and they await eagerly from one moment to the next to get one commandment or the other, but they always stay in the palace. The second group, which are given specific consignments to go out of the palace to do the bidding of the king. These are the Bnei Israel that were given to go out to the challenges of life, to the lowliness of this world, and to undertake to preserve the presence of Hashem always, the presence of the king always with them. And when they complete that task, they go back to heaven, as it were, and they get rewarded. And what is their reward? That they can finally rest and be at peace. And this is what the Alshech defines Mamlechet Kohanim as servants of royalty. And how can that be? They were servants that were taken out of the palace to do the bidding of the king, and then came back. And when they came back, they were able to become like royalties, to rest like royalties as a result of their servitude, serving the king loyally whilst they came down to this world. And what is the difference between us and angels? Angels do not have feet. They cannot move higher from their current elevated state, as elevated as that may be. They have no free will. They have no Yetzer Hara. And so they've got no challenges, and that enables them to serve God constantly in His palace. But the Bnei Israel face the challenges, face the Yetzer Hara, and it's the battle that we fight and overcome of the Yetzer Hara in this world that allows us to become Goy Kadosh, which is in itself a parody. How can you have a nation which is physical with Kadosh, which is spiritually? And that's what happens when we actually overcome the Yetzer Hara. We then become Goy Kadosh. So there you have it. I hope that you've enjoyed this illumination as to our life missions, and also to understand how we have to live in according to the timetable of Hashem for very good reasons once we understand them. Sometimes we do, are blessed to understand the reasons, sometimes we don't, and we have to believe and follow through with full emunah, to wait until things are ready to be manifested, even though our souls and our emotion and our hearts are totally in line with that already, but the physical has yet to be convinced or to be brought up to the level of the soul and the heart. And as I said before, that is definitely an experience I've experienced in healing. When you have done the mental work, the spiritual work, that brings you right to the state of healing, and you can't quite understand why the body is dragging behind. It's still in memory lane. But remember also that it takes the body a lot longer to get to a state of disease than it does the mental mind. I wanted to bless you with a beautiful week. This is the week of Tu B'Shvat, where we imagine that nothing's happening in winter because nothing's growing, but in fact it's the most important and accurate definition of growth is winter, because the real growth, we can't see it, but the real growth is in the roots and the nurturing the trees with all the nutrients and ingredients it will need to come out in full bloom in the spring. And that is a true growth. So I send you a blessing that you should come to Tzfat and discover your life mission, because this place is a gem for allowing you to do that. Imagine you have a beautiful lake in the Alps of the Swiss Alps, and the water is really clear and flat. When the wind blows, the water is not so reflective and you can't see really the reflection. But when it's still, when the wind is still and you see a beautiful, smooth reflection, you can see as if you are looking directly into the mountains and the heavens that are reflected in the waters. And that's what happens when you come to Tzfat. When you're living in a busy city, there's so much noise and diversions. When you come to Tzfat, it's like moving into a city 200 years ago. And in that tranquility and relative calmness, the water's smooth and you can see the reflection of your soul through the buildings and the people of Tzfat. And that's my invitation to you, to come and experience that for you, for yourself, so that once you have that clarity, it's so much easier to embrace life, the challenges of life, and to know which road to take when you're faced with that divisive fork, which will completely change your life depending on which one you take. So may you be blessed to get that clarity and to enjoy the waiting till Hashem's time is determines that it's time to be for the things that you want to be manifested in the world, and to enjoy that period with a state of joy. Shabbat Shalom. God bless.